The Nexus station floated in the void like a particularly pretentious metal flower, its 17 research wings extending from a central hub with all the subtlety of a bureaucrat announcing his importance. Built by the Zentorian Empire, because naturally they had to be the ones with enough ego to construct a facility dedicated to studying the galaxy's most lethal creatures. It represented the pinnacle of xenobiological research. Or at least, that's what the brochures claimed, before someone had the audacity to actually test that theory. Aylin Moss stood in Decontamination Bay 3, watching purple antiseptic spray coat her regulation jumpsuit, while wondering how exactly her life had gone so spectacularly sideways. 6 months ago, she had been Dr. Aylin Moss, respected animal behaviourist with tenure at the University of New Melbourne. Now she was intern Moss, bottom-rung nobody, whose primary qualification was being human, which according to Galactic standards ranked somewhere between moderately intelligent fungus and occasionally useful furniture. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here stood a facility crammed with beings who could manipulate gravitons with their minds, see across 17 different light spectrums, and communicate through quantum-entangled pheromones. Yet, they'd hired humans specifically because someone needed to clean the cages of creatures too dangerous for proper species to handle. Because apparently, when you're expendable enough, proximity to certain death becomes a job qualification rather than a liability. Moss! Commander Blix's voice crackled through the intercom with the warm charm of a tax audit. Report to Lab Bay 7. We've got a situation. Aylin sighed, checking her equipment belt out of habit. Sonic stunner, dead battery naturally, emergency beacon. Probably worked if you defined emergency as politely asking for help. Standard issue plasma torch, more useful for opening particularly stubborn food containers than actual defence. The Zentorians, in their infinite wisdom, had equipped the facility's expendable staff with gear that wouldn't look out of place at a children's science fair. She made her way through the station's gleaming corridors, past observation windows offering glimpses of contained nightmares. The Crimson Stalker paced in her reinforced habitat, 6 legs moving with liquid grace, while her triple rows of teeth gleamed under artificial sunlight. Ironhide slumbered in his thermal chamber, scales rising and falling like tectonic plates. The Widowmaker hung motionless in her web-filled enclosure, 8 eyes tracking movement with the patience of geological time, all properly contained, all safely behind barriers designed by the galaxy's finest minds and built with materials that could withstand stellar fusion. What could possibly go wrong? Lab Bay 7's blast doors stood open, which immediately answered that question in the most unhelpful way possible. Emergency lights bathed the corridor in crimson, and the distinct smell of ozone and fear hung in the recycled air. Through the doorway, Aylin could see overturned equipment, shattered containment pods, and what appeared to be a very expensive quantum scanner embedded halfway through the opposite wall. "Oh, wonderful," she muttered, stepping into chaos. The first thing she noticed was the 12-foot-tall crystalline nightmare standing in the centre of the lab like a particularly violent sculpture come to life. Horthek the Destroyer, because whoever named these creatures clearly had a flair for understatement, resembled what might happen if someone crossed a praying mantis with a medieval siege engine and then taught it advanced combat techniques. His carapace caught the emergency lighting and threw it back in prismatic shards, while 4 arms ending in razor-sharp talons gestured with the casual grace of death personified. The second thing she noticed was the cowering research staff pressed against the far wall like particularly academic sardines. "Nobody move!" Dr. Nexus Oron, the station's head xenobiologist, whispered with the authority of someone who had clearly lost all control of the situation. Her violet Altarian skin had gone pale, matching her confidence. "The containment breach occurred approximately 14 minutes ago. Security protocols have failed to engage properly." Security Chief Pan spoke into his communicator with the measured tones of someone explaining why his resume might soon need updating. "Central Command, this is Lab Base 7. The Apex-class specimen has achieved full mobility. Repeat, Horthak is loose and non-responsive to standard pacification methods." Aylin watched the creature's movements with professional interest rather than appropriate terror. Horthak's head swiveled on its segmented neck, compound eyes taking in the room with systematic precision. Each movement was calculated, controlled. This wasn't random destruction. This was a predator assessing territory. "Has anyone tried actually communicating with it?" she asked, earning stares from the assembled scientists that suggested she'd just proposed solving quantum mechanics through interpretive dance. "Communicate?" Commander Blix's voice carried the incredulous tone of someone whose worldview was actively being challenged. "It's an Apex-class predator from Vex Prime. They don't communicate. They eliminate threats and establish dominance." As if summoned by his words, Horthak's head turned toward their group. The movement was fluid, deliberate, and absolutely terrifying in its casual precision. 4 eyes, each the size of dinner plates, fixed on the cowering researchers with the interest of a gourmand selecting appetizers. But then, something peculiar happened. The creature's gaze swept across the Altarians, dismissed the Zentorian commander, passed over the Morvakian security chief, and settled on Aylin with sudden, focused intensity. The predator's entire posture shifted, not into attack mode, but into something that looked remarkably like recognition. Horthak took 1 step forward, then stopped. His massive head tilted slightly, and those compound eyes studied her with an intelligence that the research files had somehow failed to mention. The creature's razor-sharp mandibles clicked once, twice, then fell silent. The lab held its collective breath. Aylin felt a familiar sensation creeping up her spine. The same instinctive awareness she'd experienced countless times in the Australian outback when facing down aggressive wildlife. This wasn't mindless aggression. This was a test. And somehow, impossibly, the galaxy's most dangerous predator was waiting for her response. The creature remained perfectly still, 12 feet of crystalline death frozen in place, as if the entire universe had paused to see what the expendable human intern would do next. Which was, Aylin reflected, with the dark humour that had sustained her through 6 months of Galactic employment, probably the most attention her career had received since arriving at this floating monument to bureaucratic hubris. The question was, what exactly was Horthak waiting for? Time, Aylin discovered, had a peculiar way of stretching when 12 feet of apex predator decided to make you the centre of its undivided attention. The silence in Lab Bay 7 had evolved beyond awkward and settled comfortably into the realm of existentially uncomfortable, punctuated only by the soft humming of life support systems and what sounded suspiciously like Dr. Oren hyperventilating behind overturned specimen cart. Hawthorne hadn't moved, not a twitch, not a shift in posture, just that unblinking, compound-eyed stare that seemed to penetrate straight through to whatever passed for her soul. The creature's crystalline carapace caught the emergency lighting and threw it back in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't adorning something capable of reducing her to component atoms. This was, Aylin reflected, with the sort of detached analytical thinking that had served her well during her previous career, remarkably similar to her encounter with that bull elephant seal off Macquarie Island 3 years ago. Same patient stillness. Same sense of being evaluated by an intelligence that operated on fundamentally different principles than human reasoning. Same growing certainty that any sudden movement would result in immediate and spectacular violence. The difference, of course, was that elephant seals generally didn't possess retractable plasma cannons or the ability to phase shift through solid matter. Her mind drifted back to Earth, specifically to the Tasmanian Devil Rehabilitation Centre, where she'd spent 18 months learning that aggression often masked uncertainty, and dominance displays frequently covered deeper insecurities. She'd worked with creatures that could crush bone with their jaws, tear through steel mesh with their claws, and reduce grown men to quivering apologies. The secret, she discovered, wasn't superior firepower or intimidation tactics. It was understanding what they actually wanted. Dr. Moss, Commander Blix whispered, with the sort of careful enunciation people used when addressing the mentally unstable. Please step away from the specimen slowly. Security protocols indicate... Shut up, Aylin said quietly, never taking her eyes off Hawthorne. You're making him nervous. The commander's indignant splutter died as the predator's head snapped toward him with mechanical precision. Hawthorne's mandibles spread slightly, not quite a threat display, but definitely not a warm greeting either. The message was clear. Interruptions were unwelcome. Fascinating? The creature was exhibiting classic territorial behaviour, but with an unusual twist. Instead of claiming the space for himself, he seemed to be deferring to her authority over it. Aylin took a half step forward. Hawthorne's attention returned to her immediately, but without the aggressive tension that had greeted Blix's voice. Those compound eyes tracked her movement with the focus of a mathematics professor working through a particularly elegant equation. Another half step. The predator's posture shifted, not retreating, but adjusting, making space. The sort of subtle repositioning she'd seen in pack animals when acknowledging hierarchy without surrendering dignity. Incredible, Dr. Oren breathed. The specimen is exhibiting submissive characteristics, but according to all xenobiological profiles, Apex-class predators from Vex Prime don't possess social hierarchies beyond mate bonding and territorial disputes. Aylin almost smiled. Academic types were wonderfully predictable. Faced with evidence that contradicted their theories, they immediately began revising their theories rather than questioning their fundamental assumptions. It never occurred to them that perhaps their comprehensive xenobiological profiles might have missed something rather important about how these creatures actually behaved. He's not being submissive, she said, taking another careful step forward. He's being polite. The assembled scientists absorbed this statement with the sort of stunned silence typically reserved for profound revelations or catastrophic system failures. Security Chief Payne's hand moved toward his weapon, then stopped as Hawthorne's head turned toward him with lazy interest. "I wouldn't," Aylin advised. "He's not threatening anyone. He's just checking protocols." She was within arm's reach now. Assuming one possessed arms capable of spanning approximately 4 feet. Horthak loomed above her like a crystalline monument to evolutionary efficiency, but his posture remained neutral. Waiting. "Protocols?" Blix's voice cracked slightly. "What protocols?" "It's an animal." "No," Aylin said, studying the creature's micro-expressions with a sort of professional attention she'd once reserved for dissertation research. "He's not." The realization hit her with the force of academic enlightenment, combined with the sinking sensation of walking into something far more complex than anticipated. Horthak wasn't just intelligent, he was civilized. Those weren't random compound eyes studying her. They were the visual apparatus of a being that understood social structures, respected authority, and operated according to behavioral codes that the galaxy's xenobiologists had completely failed to recognize. "You escaped on purpose," she said to the Predator. "This isn't a rampage, it's a job interview." Horthak's mandibles clicked once. It might have been coincidence, but Aylin had spent enough time with non-human intelligence to recognize acknowledgement when she heard it. The implications were staggering. Every containment protocol on the station was based on the assumption that these creatures were essentially sophisticated animals. Dangerous, yes, but operating on instinct rather than reason. If that assumption was wrong. "Dr. Moss," Commander Blix said, with the careful tone of someone trying to maintain authority while his worldview crumbled around him. "Please step away from the specimen and allow security to implement proper containment procedures." Horthak's attention shifted to the commander again, but this time the movement carried a different quality. The Predator's weight settled slightly forward, compound eyes narrowing with what looked remarkably like disapproval. "Commander," Aylin said conversationally, "I really think you should let me handle this." "Absolutely not. You're an intern with no security clearance and no training in Apex class specimen management. I'm implementing Emergency Protocol 7 immediately." The change in Horthak was immediate and terrifying. The creature's casual politeness evaporated, replaced by something that made the emergency lighting seem inadequate and the lab's reinforced walls feel gossamer thin. His 4 arms spread slightly, talons extending with the soft whisper of molecular-edged death. Those compound eyes fixed on Blix with the sort of attention that prey animals typically experienced in their final moments. "Stand down!" Security Chief Pan barked, raising his plasma rifle. Which was, Aylin realized with crystalline clarity, exactly the wrong thing to do. Horthak's head swiveled toward the security chief with mechanical precision. The Predator's entire stance shifted into something that belonged in combat manuals rather than behavioral studies. Those razor-sharp mandibles spread wide, revealing depths that suggested unpleasant things about Vex Prime's evolutionary pressures. "Everyone freeze," Aylin said, with a sort of calm authority she had once used to prevent graduate students from contaminating laboratory samples. "Nobody moves, nobody speaks, nobody does anything until I say so." The remarkable thing was, they actually listened. Even Commander Blix, whose ego typically required its own gravitational field, remained perfectly still. Aylin slowly turned back to face the creature that was apparently waiting for her permission to either stand down or reduce the lab to its component molecules. "Well," she said to Horthak conversationally. "This is awkward." The standoff in Lab Bay 7 had achieved that particular quality of tension found in diplomatic negotiations between nuclear powers. Everyone desperately wanted to move, but nobody dared be the first to try. Commander Blick stood frozen with his mouth half open, apparently caught between issuing orders and maintaining vital signs. Security Chief Parn held his plasma rifle at ready position, while looking like he was reconsidering his career choices. Dr. Orun clutched her datapad, as if it might somehow provide answers to questions that xenobiology had apparently never thought to ask. And in the centre of it all, Horthak waited with the patience of geological time, compound eyes fixed on Aelin with an intensity that suggested the entire universe was holding its breath for her next decision. "Fascinating behavioural modification," Dr. Orun whispered, apparently unable to contain her scientific excitement, even in the face of potential dismemberment. "The specimen demonstrates clear recognition of hierarchical authority structures, but according to our research, Vex Prime predators don't—" "Your research," Aelin interrupted gently, "is wrong." She kept her voice conversational, the sort of tone she might use to discuss weather patterns or lunch preferences. Horthak's posture remained neutral, but she caught the subtle shift in his weight distribution, a fractional relaxation that suggested approval of her calm approach. "Impossible," Commander Blix managed, his authority apparently outweighing his survival instincts. "The Zentorian Empire has conducted comprehensive studies of all Apex-class specimens. Our xenobiological databases are the most complete in the known galaxy." "Your databases," Aelin said, taking a slow, deliberate step to her left, "are compiled by beings who've never shared a planet with anything more dangerous than bureaucratic incompetence." Horthak's head tracked her movement with fluid precision, but made no move to follow. Instead, the predator shifted his own position slightly, not blocking her path, but maintaining visual contact while allowing her freedom of movement, the sort of respectful attention a subordinate might pay to a superior during a formal briefing. "Earth," Aelin continued, settling into the rhythm of an impromptu lecture, "is what you might charitably call a challenging environment. Everything there evolved to kill everything else, often in creative and entertaining ways. Humans survived not because we were the strongest or fastest or most venomous. We survived because we learned to work with the things that could tear us apart." She gestured toward Horthak, who remained statue still except for the constant micro-movements of his compound eyes. "This isn't an animal, this is a soldier. This is... and every soldier understands chain of command." The silence that followed this declaration carried the weight of paradigm shifts and crumbling academic certainties. Dr. Orun's datapad slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering against the floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed lab. "But the containment protocols," Pon said weakly, "the neural suppressors, the psionic dampeners, are insulting," Aelin finished. "You've been treating intelligent beings like zoo animals. How exactly did you expect them to respond?" As if summoned by her words, alert klaxons began wailing throughout the station. Emergency light shifted from amber to urgent red, and the intercom crackled to life with a sort of panicked efficiency that suggested someone's very bad day was about to get significantly worse. "All hands to emergency stations," came the announcement. "Multiple containment breaches in sectors 7 through 12. Repeat, we have multiple Apex class specimens exhibiting coordinated non-compliance behaviours. Commander Blix's face went through several interesting colour changes before settling on a pale green that matched his nausea. Coordinated? They can't coordinate. They're isolated in separate containment areas with no means of communication. Unless, Dr. Orun said with the dawning horror of someone whose life's work was being rewritten in real time, they've been communicating all along through methods we didn't recognise. The laboratory's blast doors suddenly cycled open, and intern Eben Cray stumbled through, his regulation jumpsuit torn and his face bearing the expression of someone who had recently had his world view fed through an industrial shredder. "The Crimson Stalker," he gasped. "She's out of containment, but she's not attacking anyone. She's just sitting there, waiting. Same with Ironhide and the Widowmaker. They've all positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the station, but they won't move without..." His words died as he caught sight of Horthook looming in the centre of the lab. Ebon's hand moved toward his emergency beacon, then stopped as the Predator's head turned toward him with lazy interest. "Without what?" Aylin asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. "Without permission," Ebon whispered. "They're waiting for permission." The pieces clicked together in Aylin's mind with the satisfying precision of a well-designed mechanism. These weren't random escape specimens. This was a coordinated demonstration. The galaxy's most dangerous predators had simultaneously decided to showcase exactly how inadequate the station's security measures really were, then politely waited for someone with actual authority to acknowledge their point. "Commander," she said, without taking her eyes off Horthack, "I believe you have a choice to make." "What kind of choice?" Blix asked, though his tone suggested he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. "You can continue treating intelligent beings like animals and deal with the inevitable consequences of that approach, or you can try something radical like respecting their autonomy and seeing what happens." "Absolutely not," Blix snapped, his bureaucratic instincts overriding his survival programming. "I'm the station commander. I don't negotiate with specimens. I contain them. Security Chief Payne, implement Emergency Protocol Omega immediately." The effect on Horthack was immediate and spectacular. The Predator's casual politeness evaporated like atmosphere through a hull breach, replaced by something that made Apex Predator seem like an inadequate description. His forearms spread wide, talons extending with the whisper of molecular-edged death. Those compound eyes fixed on Blix with the sort of attention that typically preceded obituaries. But more alarming than Horthack's transformation was the sudden harmonic vibration that began resonating through the station's hull, a deep, thrumming sound that seemed to originate from everywhere at once. "Oh no," Dr. Orun breathed. "They're calling to each other." The vibration intensified, and through the laboratory's observation windows, Aylin caught glimpses of movement in the corridors beyond. Shapes that shouldn't exist outside of containment, moving with purpose and coordination through the station's passages. "How many Apex-class specimens does this facility house?" she asked conversationally. 17, Parn replied automatically, then went pale as the implications registered. 17 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, Aylin mused, all coordinating their actions and all apparently waiting for someone to demonstrate proper respect for their intelligence. This should be interesting. Horthick's head turned toward her. and for a moment those compound eyes seemed almost amused. The predator's mandibles clicked once, a sound that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and anticipation. The universe, Aelin reflected, was about to discover exactly what happened when you underestimated Earth's most unremarkable species. 3 months later, Aelin sat in what used to be Commander Blix's office, reviewing applications for the newly created position of Interspecies Apex Predator Relations Specialist, a job title that had required 17 interdepartmental meetings and 1 minor diplomatic incident to officially establish. The Zentorian bureaucracy, it turned out, possessed no existing classification for humans who could convince galactic nightmares to behave like well-trained colleagues. Outside her window, Horfak was conducting what he euphemistically called orientation sessions with new security staff. The sessions primarily involved standing very still while 12 feet of crystalline death evaluated their potential as pack members. The mortality rate had dropped to 0 once they'd stopped issuing weapons and started emphasizing respect. "Ma'am," Technician Eulara's voice crackled through the intercom, "we've received another request from the Andorian Research Collective. They're offering triple standard rates for consultation on their Void Walker containment issues." Aelin sighed, marking another application as promising but probably insufficient. The galaxy, having discovered that humans possessed an inexplicable ability to communicate with creatures that reduced other species to component atoms, had developed an urgent interest in Earth's primitive diplomatic techniques. "Schedule it for next month," she replied, "and remind them that our specialists require full authority over containment protocols, no exceptions." The door chimed, and Dr. Auron entered with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of xenobiology had been reconstructed from scratch. She'd adapted remarkably well, considering her previous worldview had been obliterated by the revelation that intelligence might manifest in forms more complex than academic papers could describe. "The latest behavioural assessments are remarkable," Auron reported, settling into the chair across from Aelin's desk. "Productivity among contained specimens has increased 400% since implementing your collaborative custody protocols. They're actually volunteering for research participation." "Amazing what happens when you treat people like people," Aelin observed, reviewing a particularly interesting application from a former wildlife photographer. "Any word on Blix's new assignment?" "Last I heard, he was managing supply requisitions for a mining station in the Outer Rim. Apparently, inanimate objects respond better to his leadership style." The irony was delicious. The Zentorian Empire's most prestigious research facility was now operated according to principles developed by a species they'd classified as marginally useful. Every major government in the galaxy had suddenly discovered an urgent need for human consultants, creating what economists were calling the Earth Brain Drain, as behavioural specialists abandoned academic positions for lucrative interspecies diplomacy careers. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ebon Cray peered through the doorway, looking significantly more confident than the terrified intern who'd stumbled into Lab Bay 3 months ago. "Ma'am, the Widowmaker is requesting permission to extend her habitat. She's interested in establishing what she calls a proper hunting preserve for educational demonstrations." "Approved," Aelin said without hesitation. "Have engineering coordinate with her on specifications. And Ebon? She prefers Lady Arachnis when you're addressing her directly." After he left, Oren shook her head in wonder. 6 months ago, the idea of negotiating real estate agreements with apex predators would have been considered insanity. 6 months ago, Aelin replied, the galaxy thought intelligence was limited to beings who built starships and filed tax returns. Turns out, the universe is more creative than our paperwork suggested. Her communicator chimed with an incoming priority message from Galactic Command. The header read, Emergency consultation request, Leviathan-class specimen, Tau Ceti system. Standard diplomatic overtures have failed. Human intervention requested immediately. Aelin smiled, forwarding the message to her scheduling department. The galaxy's most dangerous creatures had chosen Earth's most unremarkable species as their preferred interpreters, and the universe was still trying to figure out how to file that under existing bureaucratic categories. Through her window, Horfak completed his latest security evaluation by gently patting a trembling Altarian recruit on the shoulder with one massive talon. The gesture somehow managed to convey both approval and the promise of horrible death should that approval ever be withdrawn. You know, Aelin said to Oren, I'm starting to think we're going to need a bigger office. The universe, it seemed, was finally ready to admit that perhaps intelligence came in more forms than it had previously imagined, and Earth's supposedly primitive species had somehow become the galaxy's most valuable diplomatic resource. Who could have predicted that?